Hi friends, welcome to my YouTube channel SS Analysis. First of all, I would like to tell you that today I am going to analyze the movements of S&P 500 futures in different time frames, and along with that I would prefer to speak about dollar index and S&P 500 futures movements. So let us start with the movements of dollar index in a daily time frame. Friends, here you can see that in a daily chart, the dollar index has reached up to the levels of 98.86, where I find that the dollar index has attained the highest position where it has started to face stiff resistance. We will find heavy sell-off in dollars during the upcoming week, because here I find that currently the dollar index has reached in overbought territory, where I find escalation of tariff trade war between the United States and China. Dollar index has attained the highest position. Here I find that some positive development will result in sharp sell-off in dollar, where I find that the immediate support levels where the dollar will find at the level of 97.82, and second support will be provided by the level of 97.46, and third support will be here at the level of 96.80, where the 200 days moving average will provide good support to dollar index. But till the dollar index remain amid this zone where it has been maintaining an uptrend since October 2018, let me show you that how index has attained this uptrend since September 2018. Here you can see where dollar index was at the level of 93.46 on September 20th, 2018, when tariff trade war started. Here we can see that the dollar index witnessed a steep upward move from these levels and achieved the levels of 97.47, where find some resistance, but therefore I find that this is the level where the dollar bears will take heavy positions to short dollar, and therefore I find that after sustaining amid this uptrend zone, now I find that the dollar will face heavy sell-off from these levels, because this is the level where the dollar index has reached in an overbought territory. Here I find that during the upcoming week we will see the dollar index to break this immediate support, which is at the level of 97.47, where I find the dollar may break this strong support levels during the upcoming weeks, which is at the level of 96.77, where the 200 days moving average will provide some support. But I find that if we find some permanent resolution on the tariff trade war front, or both the US and the China agree to carry on the currently levied tariffs on each other, we will see the dollar index to move downward. Now let us see the movements of gold futures before analyzing the movements of S&P 500 index. So friends, here you can see a daily chart of gold futures where I have analyzed the movements of gold futures. Here you can see that after touching the lows of $1,284 on May 27, 2019, gold futures started to move upward and achieved the levels of $1,455 on 25th June 2019, and since then the gold futures, here you can see that the gold futures have been maintaining amid this uptrend zone, where I have constructed this zone in yellow color. You can see that the gold futures have been maintaining an upward trend till they reached the levels of $1,565 here on August 26, 2019, on the Chinese move of levying some tariff on US products. US President ordered American companies to come back from China. Therefore, here you can see that the gold futures touched these levels of $1,564, where we find some sell-off due to profit booking. Here I have divided this zone in a steep upward zone. From here, from 1st August to 9th September, I have constructed this steep upward trend zone and I have divided these two zones in different zones where I would prefer to buy gold. If the gold futures reached amid this zone, which is my fresh buying zone, which starts from the level of $1399 up to $1429, where I find that I would prefer to take a long position. If the gold futures take a downward move up to these levels, here I find where the gold bulls will prefer to take long positions from these levels. But before, just above this is a bearish zone where the gold futures may consolidate before moving downward. This bearish zone starts from the levels of 1429 to $1461. If the gold futures enter in this bearish zone, no doubt that the gold futures will start some consolidation before moving more downward amid this zone. But I find that the gold futures will hardly break these levels, which is currently at the level of $1491, because here this is my bullish zone where the gold futures will find an immediate support. If they turn back into this zone, we will find good buying. Here you can see that the gold futures have been constantly maintaining amid this zone where whenever they touch the upper end of this uptrend zone, gold futures meet some selling, but whenever they touch the lower end of this uptrend zone, we can see here the gold futures witness buying. The gold futures find a lot of buyer which keep the uptrend in gold futures intact, and here you can see that this is my uptrend zone where currently the gold futures have been maintaining amid this zone. No doubt that the gold futures are currently at a decisive juncture because we have not found any permanent resolution on tariff trade war front when the heads of the both countries are trying their best to resolve this. Both the US and the China want to resolve this because the tariff trade war has been impacting the economies of both the countries and resulted in growing fear of slowdown at the global level. Therefore, I find that the gold futures found some selling pressure above this breakout zone. Here you can see that above the levels of $1552, gold futures witnessed some selling first on August 26, and constantly whenever the gold futures tried to break this level, gold futures witnessed some selling pressure from these levels, and currently the gold futures have found good support at the level of $1527, where I find at the lower end of this breakout zone, which is at the level of $1522, gold futures once again will try to move upward up to the levels of $1552 if the US and the China do not come with a clear deal on the tariff trade war front. We will find the gold futures will move upward up to the levels of $1585 during the upcoming week. So friends, now let us check the movements of S&P 500 futures before moving up to S&P 500. So here you can see the movements of S&P 500 futures in a daily time frame. This is a daily chart of S&P 500 futures. Here you can see when the tariff trade war started in October 2018, S&P 500 futures were sustaining at the level of 2939, from where S&P 500 futures entered into a bearish territory on 3rd October 2018. Here we can see that the S&P 500 futures started to move downward from these levels up to the levels of 2711. This was a steep downward move, but once again they tried to move upward, but the selling pressure was quite heavy above the level of 2820, where when the S&P 500 futures started to move downward once again, and in this process they came below the 200 days moving average and moved downward up to the levels of 2601, and no doubt that the S&P 500 futures tried to consolidate amid this zone from the levels of 2626 to 2821. Once again, from December 3rd, 2018, S&P 500 futures started to move downward when the S&P 500 futures moved amid this steep downward zone, and they touched the levels of 2320 in a very short time from 30th November to 25th December 2018. Here you can see that within a month, S&P 500 futures take a steep downward move from the levels of 2813 to 2317. So this was a steep downward move, but once again the S&P 500 futures started to move upward since December 2018, and they take a sharp reversal up to the levels of 2959, which they achieved on April 30th, 2019. No doubt that the S&P 500 futures once again moved downward, but here you can see that they found a good support at 200 days moving average, which is currently at the level of 2809, where I find that the S&P 500 futures find a good support every time whenever they come downward. Here you can see when the S&P 500 futures touched the 200 days moving average on August 6, 2019, they take a sharp upward move. When they touch the 200 days moving average on August 26, 2019, we have seen a good recovery in the S&P 500 futures, but due to the growing uncertainty at the tariff trade war front, where the changing statements over a final deal makes the situation even more worse for the global equity indices, here I find that in a daily time frame, S&P 500 futures have formed an exhaustive candle. Here you can see that this is the exhaustive candle where the S&P 500 futures found stiff resistance from 50 days moving average, which is currently at the level of 2948. Here we can see that a sharp sell-off was there on August 30th, 2019, where this has resulted in formation of an exhaustive candle. Let me zoom this. Here you can see that after facing stiff resistance at the level of 3026, where the S&P 500 futures found stiff resistance, and here we can see that the S&P 500 futures found heavy sell-off on July 30th, 2019, and nosedived from these levels up to the levels of 2776 on August 6, 2019, when the S&P 500 futures witnessed some buying from these levels, where I find that the level of 2776 provides a good support, because here we can start advent of buying from the 200 days moving average support, which provides good support to S&P 500 futures, and S&P 500 futures once again moved upward. Here you can see that on August 7th, once again we witnessed some selling pressure when the S&P 500 futures touched the levels of 2823, but due to the thick presence of buyers, S&P 500 futures started to move upward, and here you can see that this buying continued on August 8, 2019, but since then here you can see that the S&P 500 futures have been constantly witnessing a lot of selling pressure at these levels. Let me mark this level for you. Here you can see that how the S&P 500 futures have been constantly witnessing stiff resistance at the level of 2941. S&P 500 futures have been constantly witnessing stiff resistance at these levels, where here you can see that after coming downward when the S&P 500 futures broke this level on August 2nd, 2019, since then the S&P 500 futures have been constantly facing stiff resistance at these levels. Again and again, here you can see that the S&P 500 futures attempted to break this level, but they could not, and finally this has resulted in formation of an exhaustive candle on August 30th, 2019. Here I find that once again the S&P 500 futures will try to repeat the movements of November 2018, because currently the two major economies of the world, the US and the China, are not able to reach any decisive move to resolve the tariff trade war, which has been constantly growing uncertainty in the global equity markets. Therefore, I find that an absence of any decisive move on this tariff trade war front will result in repetition of a downward move in S&P 500 futures, which will keep the S&P 500 futures to move downward with a steep downward move, what the S&P 500 futures witnessed in November 2018. Therefore, I have constructed this steep sliding zone. So friends, I find that the formation of this exhaustive candle in a daily chart of S&P 500 futures will result in sharp downward moves, where I find that if the S&P 500 futures are not able to find strong support at the 20 days exponential moving average, we will see a sharp downward move up to the levels of 2888, where we will find that if we find a downward move on September 1st, 2019 from the current levels, if we find a downward move from the levels of 2925 to 2878 on September 1st, 2019, that will confirm continuation of a downward trend, which will confirm the formation of this exhaustive candle if the S&P 500 futures formed a red candle on September 1st, 2019 from the levels of 2927 to 2888, will get the confirmation of this exhaustive candle, when we can see the S&P 500 futures to remain in sharp sell-off mode. Therefore, I find that if the China and the US do not come with a solid proposal to make a final deal, we'll see the S&P 500 futures to break the strong support level of 200 days moving average, which is currently at the level of 2808. If the S&P 500 futures break this strong support level, we see S&P 500 futures to take a sharp, steep downward move during the upcoming weeks. Friends, now let us have a look at the movement of S&P 500 index in a daily time frame. Here you can see that when the S&P 500 index started to move downward in this steep sliding zone in December 2018, when the tariff trade war started between the China and the US, S&P 500 index started to move downward from the levels of 2799. S&P 500 index moved downward amid this steep sliding zone up to the levels of 2342 on December 24, 2018. Here you can see that since December 26, 2018, S&P 500 index started to move upward and touched the levels of 2956 on January 5, 2019, where I find that the S&P 500 index found stiff resistance at the level of 2956, once again after touching the same levels at the level of 2956. S&P 500 index witnessed some selling pressure, but here you can see that this is the level where the S&P 500 index finds stiff resistance when move upward from downward points. But once the S&P 500 index sustain above this level, try to move up to the next resistance level, which is at the level of 3025. Here you can see that the S&P 500 index touched this level on July 23rd, 2019, and once again they tried to break this level on July 26th, but here you can see that this level provides a stiff resistance to S&P 500 index, and on the lower side the S&P 500 index. Here I would like to explain some important levels of S&P 500 index in a daily time frame. here you can see that the levels of 2820 is first important support level in an upward move, where this provides a stiff resistance when the S&P 500 futures move upward. But whenever the S&P 500 index break this immediate resistance, no doubt that a move above the level of 2824 provides a breakout in S&P 500 index when the next immediate resistance is at the level of 2929, which provides a stiff resistance to S&P 500 index. And once the S&P 500 index sustain above the level 9, no doubt that the S&P 500 index try to break the next resistance level, which is at the level of 3025. But whenever they started to move downward, once again the level of 2929 provides a good support in a downfall. But if we find the S&P 500 to make a downward move, once again we find that of 2824, this level provides a good support to S&P 500 index in a downward move. Once again, here you can see that in a daily time frame, S&P 500 index found stiff resistance at 50 days moving average, where you can see S&P 500 index found sharp sell off from these levels, from the levels of 2945, and touched the levels of 2908, where the S&P 500 index found good support from the 20 days exponential moving average, from where we found some buying in S&P 500 index. Let me zoom this for you. So friends, here I find that if the S&P 500 index started to move downward from the levels of 3025, where S&P 500 index has stiff resistance zone, amid this zone from the levels of 2992 to 3025, S&P 500 index started to move downward since July 29, 2019, and take a sharp downward move, where here you can see that in a daily time frame on August 5th, 2019, here we can see that a gap down was there in S&P 500 index, which has resulted in more bearish pressure in S&P 500 index. No doubt that the S&P 500 index tried to move upward but found stiff resistance at these levels, at the level of 2941. As I have already explained, that this level provides a stiff resistance to S&P 500 index, and here we can see that the S&P 500 index witnessed heavy sell-off from these levels, and the same thing was there on August 30th, 2019, when the S&P 500 index found heavy sell-off from these levels, when the S&P 500 index faced stiff resistance at the level of 2941, from where heavy selling was there, which has resulted the S&P 500 index to move downward, where it found a good support from the 50 days exponential moving average. Here you can see that the 50 days exponential moving average provides first immediate support to S&P 500 index, where some buying was there. But I find that if we find a gap down opening in S&P 500 index on September 1st, 2019, below the levels of 2916, we will see the S&P 500 index to move downward up to the levels of 2892. No doubt, if the US and the China are not able to take any decisive action on tariff trade war front, we will see the S&P 500 index will face heavy sell-off from the current levels, which may result in sharp downward moves, where I find that the immediate support will be provided at the lower end of this uptrend zone at the levels of 2956, where the S&P 500 index may take a bounce back once again. But here I find that this level, here you can see, this will provide stiff resistance to any upward move of S&P 500 index And no doubt, if the S&P 500 index remain amid this steep sliding zone, we will see the S&P 500 index to break the strong support levels of 200 days moving average, which is currently at the level of 2804, and I find that a breakout below the 200 days moving average will result in heavy sell-off in S&P 500 index, which will result in a steep downward move in S&P 500 index, which will keep the S&P 500 index amid this sliding zone till we find a permanent deal on tariff trade war front. Therefore, friends, be ready to see an action in S&P 500 index during the upcoming week. No doubt that a heavy volatility will be there. So friends, thanks for watching this video. If you like this video, don't forget to share this video with your more and more friends. Thank you.